You are listening to the Yoga for Balance podcast. I'm your host, Heather Jurdy. Thank you so much for listening. On the show, we have Bob Cirino of the Yoga Studies Institute. We'll talk about an incredible book that Bob introduced me to called How Yoga Works, as well as get into some of the different interesting things that the Yoga Studies Institute is doing to share some of the original teachings of yoga with yogis today. And I find that going back to yoga philosophy and what began this sacred science is really what makes yoga so powerful, way beyond the physical postures that might bring some of us to the practice. And before we begin, let's start with just a nice grounding, centering breath. So wherever you are, allow yourself to come fully into the moment. Let go of what happened before this and what will come next. And just focus on your breath for a moment. Take a nice deep breath in, fill your lungs completely, and hold your full breath in a relaxed way at the top of your lungs. Give them a nice stretch. Exhale, open your mouth and let it go. Enjoy this conversation and thank you again for listening. Welcome to the show, Yoga for Balance, Bob, and I would love for you, if you don't mind, to introduce yourself and just give a little background on who you are, and then we'll dive into our conversation.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for having me, Heather. I'm very excited to be here. I followed you for a long time on Instagram, so it's great to connect with you in this way. My name is Bob Cirino. I live just outside of Philadelphia, about 45 minutes south in Pennsylvania, and I am the executive director at the Yoga Studies Institute. I'm an avid gardener. I love to longboard, and I'm a wannabe paraglider. So I guess that's a little bit about me.
I have never tried paragliding, but we have it here right off the coast in La Jolla. So if you want a fun experience and you're ever out this way, definitely check that out.
Beautiful. I was in the French Alps the first time I went paragliding. I've been hooked ever since. It's so quiet up there.
Oh, I can imagine. That would be beautiful. And what is your experience of yoga?
I have had a varied experience of yoga. I grew up as an athlete, playing a lot of football and baseball, and skating, and then lifting. And so yoga was only through the lens of exercise. Yoga was pretty uninteresting to me. It seemed like a waste of time, and I got bored pretty easily. I was more into the more exciting, rushing adrenaline kind of stuff. But as I started digging into philosophy, especially Asian philosophy, deeper and deeper, yoga began taking on a totally different meaning for me, and I got into the contemplative side of yoga, and especially as I started learning about the subtle body. I'm somebody who my body is a gateway for me in a lot of ways. I'm very sensory. I'm a kinesthetic learner. I like to touch and feel and play. And so once I started considering yoga through a very different lens, it began unraveling its secrets to me. It began unraveling a whole different experience. And I read a book called How Yoga Works, which is written by Geshe Michael Roach, and that really, really reframed what it meant to practice yoga. And it all of a sudden changed from just something that you do on a mat to something that extends out into every single aspect of your life. I've been a fan of meditation for a while, but I really love action. And so when I found yoga, the asana and the pranayama, and then even how the yamas and niyamas extend into our world, and even the last three of meditation and focus, all of a sudden, I began having this kinesthetic experience of meditation that was able to continue all day long, admittedly much more effectively than just a seated meditation. And as I began to connect the two, really special things started happening in my world. I mean, I could go on and on about how yoga has opened my heart and made me more patient and given me opportunities to go inward and outward, all at the same time. So my experience of yoga has been pretty varied. And as much as I like the explosive, athletic kind of energy, I actually really prefer the slower, easier, more meditative asana series.
Yes, I think that can be the case for a lot of us. You know, we all find our way to yoga for something, and then I think the other aspects of it start trickling out and you're like, wow, that's where the beauty is. That's where the power
Totally.
is. And I actually how yoga works is what brought us together. You had reached out to me and asked if I was interested in that book and had sent it over to me, and didn't pick it up right away, and then I kept seeing it. I'm like, how yoga works. Okay, let's give that one a try. And I love to read. So I started reading that in the mornings, and I just kept giggling and laughing. And I just thought it was such a great story. And it tells yoga in this beautiful metaphor in a way through this girl's story. So I guess if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving listeners, if they've never heard of this book, if you don't mind telling them a little bit about the book and then also about the author, because I think his story is very fascinating as well.
I'm so glad you enjoyed that book. It is my number one gifted book. And that was before I was involved with the Yoga Studies Institute at all. That was basically my gateway into yoga and then ultimately the Yoga Studies Institute. Um, I'd love to start talking about the author and then get into the book because I think by taking that approach, it might contextualize it really wonderfully. Um, the author is Geshe Michael Roach, and he's an interesting character for a number of reasons. One of the really interesting things that he's accomplished in his life is that he is the first Westerner to have received the title Geshe, which is essentially a mastery of Asian philosophy, where he studied for 25 years at at a monastery, the Saramay Monastery. And after 25 years of study, he was able to accomplish pretty high level debates and philosophical understanding, and then ultimately was practicing yoga pretty intensely. So after he got his distinction as a geshe, he came back to the United States. And actually, in the very last years, he was still working on as a geshe while he was doing this next aspect, which was his abbot told him, "Hey, I know you've been studying a lot here, but I need you to go to New York City." And he goes, "New York City? I much prefer not New York City." And so he goes, "Okay, and you're going to start a business." And he goes, "A business? You understand, I'm a philosopher. I study books. I study Sanskrit and Tibetan." And he goes, "Okay, well, what kind of business?" And so he said, "You're going to start a business in the diamond trade." And so he said, "I mean, but that trade is mired in controversy and it's a little questionable in many ways." And he goes, "All the more reasons for you to practice what you've learned in a different context." And so he ended up helping develop this company to do $250 million in sales from just a single loan and a couple people, built it out to be this very large diamond jewelry organization, which then was bought by Warren Buffett. You may have heard of him. And so upon the sale of the organization, he then donated all of the money, almost all of the money that he had accumulated in that sale to the preservation of Asia's legacy texts. So these philosophical texts from India, from Tibet, texts that have been just essentially virtually lost in libraries in Mongolia and Russia and scattered across the earth. There's caves that they found manuscripts in, and they're otherwise decomposing or not accessible. So he put all of his money in an input project that took refugees and gave them the ability to learn how to use a computer, input these texts, and then made it for free for everybody online. So it was originally called the Asian Classics Input Project, but now they are called the Asian Legacy Library. So all at the same time, concurrently with that, he went into a 3-year silent retreat in the desert of Arizona. And in the depths of 1,000 days of silence, he translated the Master Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. And he was able to utilize all these different texts in a way that is quite inaccessible to most folks. Because of this beautiful input project, he was able to say, when Patanjali says ahimsa, for example, what did he really mean? So then he could go and search ahimsa in all the different Sanskrit texts, and then also how it was carried through in the Tibetan language and lineage, and was able to come out with a really interesting and fresh perspective on Master Patanjali's Yoga Sutra. But one of the things that is unique about Geshe Michael is that he isn't, though he goes very deeply into the technical aspect of things, he's very focused on how to make it accessible to a lot of people. Because when you're getting into these ideas, I mean, it can be a little challenging to say, okay, that's a neat idea, but how do I live that? How does that make my life better? How does that grow compassion within me? How do I use this? So while he wrote this amazing translation of the Yoga Sutra with a commentary, he was simultaneously writing this fictional novel called How Yoga Works, which is focused, as you say, around this young lady who is thrown into jail and uses her yoga practice in the most complete and comprehensive sense of a yogic practice to transform her prison into a paradise. So you'll have to read the book to learn a little bit more about that. But when I started to sink my teeth into those ideas, it totally changed the way that I saw yoga as a tool of transformation in a lot of different ways, not just a way for me to be healthy, because don't get me wrong, it's going to make you healthy. If you have a good yoga practice, you will tend to become more fit and more healthy and more regular and stabilized. But there's deeper levels to it that are very, very sweet to practice. And when I first started really tapping into this, Heather, I remember, I remember, I just started crying at beautiful things just throughout the day. It was like, I was like, I am getting a little more flexible, because that's cool. I do feel good. My breath feels, more regular and more profound and more complete throughout the day, which makes me feel better. But in addition, it somehow had this heart opening experience for me that helped me be more loving to the people I want to love, and helped me be more patient to the people who deserve my patience, which is pretty much everybody. And and it allowed me to start getting ahead of when I was going to get into a negative thought. Um, and so on this experiential level of just being able to rein in the monkey of the mind, that's just saying like, I want to eat, I want to yell, I'm angry, I'm happy, this just crazy. It became much more accessible to have a very intentional life. And one of the things that I look for, at least in my life, is joy and bliss, and just the bliss of love in the present moment. And somehow my yoga was making that happen. So, how yoga works gave me a story to take these ideas that intellectually checked out, but it gave me the story that I could relate to. And honestly, it gave me a teacher, because I don't have a yoga teacher near me that I found that is teaching these ideas. These are pretty unique ideas. So it was neat to have the protagonist of the story be my teacher in the same way that she was the teacher to the people around her.
Yes, and even the characters that, like you said, she's in coming, meeting in the story, and they're maybe thinking yoga is one thing, and then the story unfolds for them to realize the breadth of what yoga covers. And the way that they share that is just so beautiful and so well done. So definitely, if you have not read How Yoga Works, I absolutely recommend it. I can't even tell you how many times I've brought that book up since reading it, how many times it made me laugh or giggle or cry. I'm sure I cried during that book.
I no doubt did.
Yeah.
Each time, by the way. It's not like it gets easier. In fact, it gets even deeper.
So good. And then, so Yoga Studies Institute and this author. So, you guys are working with him and also working to share these foundational concepts and literature around yoga and what yoga really is and how yoga extends far off of the yoga mat and even breath work and meditation and the full range of what yoga has to offer, including some uncovering and sharing some things that I had never even heard of. You had mentioned the other day on the phone of the one of the original yoga sequences that you guys had uncovered. So I'd love for you to share a little more about what your goal is and what you guys are doing to help share this message.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, every day I wake up and I just can't wait to get started because it's really, really, really satisfying to delve into the origins of yoga on a daily basis and, scratch your head and say, how do I make this available to the people of today? So our mission at the Yoga Studies Institute is to bring yoga's original wisdom to the world. Now, original wisdom, you can say, well, how original is original? At some point, you know, uh, where do you draw a line? But what we really mean by that is that thousands of years ago, yoga was practiced in a very specific way. And if we look around us in the world today, we don't always see that same practice. So we hear these stories of people who accomplished just truly tremendous feats um, of things in the physical world, but more importantly, things in the mental world of existing on this earth in a really beautiful way that's designed to help others and to find deep peace in each and every single moment. So we look at the texts that have persisted for so long, but also, like you mentioned, some of the texts that have been lost or virtually lost, because there are still beautiful oral traditions. There are practitioners who are not very public that are doing absolutely incredible things. So our goal is two-pronged. It's not only is it to understand yoga's original wisdom, but it's to then bring it to the world, which is a whole different ball of wax in and of itself. So we stand on the shoulders of the Asian Legacy Library. I mean, there's nothing that we're putting out in the world that's a new idea. Our entire purpose is to study these beautiful texts and then practice them and then share them with the world. So many of our instructors and our staff have completed 3-year silent retreats. Now, 3 years of pratyahara is, that's nothing to sniff at. I've not done that. But I'm surrounded by these incredible beings who have, and I learn every day from them. But to go in 3 years into contemplation on some of these texts, there's a lot to learn. That's for sure. So what we've done is we really look at the core texts of yoga, and what's important to note is that we don't look at them in a vacuum, because the Yoga Sutra, for example, just as an example, there's the Bhagavad Gita, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, there's many beautiful texts. What's really interesting that I love about the folks who are participating with the research side and the practice side of the Yoga Studies Institute is that they're very knowledgeable of the contemporary texts of that time. So you're not just looking at the Yoga Sutra. If you look at, between 0 AD and 200 AD or 300 AD, it was just this golden era of philosophy in India. And I mean, a lot of really big ideas were happening at that time. Obviously, before that too, but if we're just looking at the Yoga Sutra, what's incredible is if you're familiar with the other contemporary works that may or may not be necessarily quote unquote yogic, there was a lot. I mean, back in the day, Heather, I don't know how familiar you are with this, but when I learned this, I thought it was so cool. Like the thing in those time frames were to have big public debates where philosophers would go at it with each other. And so these aren't like strange things that people are doing out in the corners of the world by themselves, but it was, I mean, in my mind's eye, I see them as like gladiator fights, where the winner of the debate would actually take all the students of the loser, and then anything that the loser had written would be tied to a tail of a dog and run through the city. And so high stakes. So anyway, it was a time of the world where philosophy was super sexy. It's like everyone was trying to figure out what is the true nature of reality. Like, what is this experience that we're having? That was a very big thing. So in looking at the other texts surrounding it, we're able to really contextualize the information, not just in the author's intent, but to be able to triangulate it from the commentaries of their contemporaries and to see, who was doing what, where, when, getting into the philosophical gossip of the time. So what we do is we break that down into different levels of engagement. So we bring that all the way down to daily asana classes, where we put out weekly asana classes of many different styles, but there's one thread that ties them all together, which is we practice yoga. In the conventional sense, yoga, we practice asana, the outer practice of yoga, very, very tightly connected with the inner practice of yoga. So much so that it's a very big blurring of the lines. So we focus a lot on what are these ideas that we're holding in our head as we're moving our bodies, so that we can combine the inner and the outer methods. We're yoking. Yoke comes from the word yoga, from the same root that yoga comes from. So we're yoking together these inner and outer practices. So our asana classes are pretty fun. We're putting out meditations pretty soon. Very excited about that. And we have these mini courses. For example, this one is people are really gravitating to this one. It's Yoga for Financial Abundance, where we take the different texts from the Yoga Sutra and we say, what does yoga have to teach us about abundance? And then how can we apply that to any material object? We can be looking at money as just one example, but let's look at what's the root cause of abundance, and then how do we create that in our world using yoga? And then we have more developed courses, which are more intense, ranging from 20 hours all the way up to 100 hours. And then we offer certifications too. So one of the certifications is in Lady Naguma's yoga, which you referenced just a moment ago. This one's really cool. So this one is the example of the lesser known. So it's not the Yoga Sutra that everybody gets in their YTT. Lady Naguma's yoga is a very rare, very unique yogic practice that specifically focuses on utilizing the subtle body to, what do we call it? To crush your kleshas. So klesha is any kind of negative experience or negative thought or negative feeling. And so we call them klesha crushing. Lady Naguma herself didn't call it that, but this is one of the ways where Master Taranatha wrote this amazing commentary on, it's called The Machine of the Body. And the machine of the body is really interesting when you think about the subtle body. With the people talk about the channels and the winds and these chakras, and it's almost like it's a plumbing map, or it's like this infrastructure of the body, or as Master Taranatha says, it's the machine of the body. And so Master Taranatha was the beneficiary of Lady Naguma's yoga. Here's how it went down. Lady Naguma was this extremely accomplished yogini who lived in India around 1000 AD. And she created these incredible asana series that she was able to accomplish pretty far out feats. And so the word of her accomplishments traveled far and wide. So a gentleman by the name of Kumpo Nyeljor traveled for weeks and weeks and weeks just to try to learn from her. And he took all of his possessions, he pounded them into gold dust. He sold them all and then got gold, pounded it into dust, and then offered all of this gold to her and said, teach me everything that you know. All of my worldly possessions are embodied in this. So she throws the dust to the wind and she says, I take you on as my student. And so she teaches him and she says, listen, you can only teach this to one person for 7 generations. So over 7 generations, her yoga philosophy and yoga system was passed down. And then finally, after 7 years or 7 generations, then it became more widespread. And Master Taranatha put together the first commentary that made sense of this very interesting approach to yoga. So that text, if you look for it, you cannot find it. And so Geshe Michael, with the Asian Classics Input Project, was in St. Petersburg Library, and they were looking for completely unrelated texts when they stumbled upon in this room where, when the bombs were being dropped on the library in the wars, there were people who were literally in the room putting out the fires with their hands just to preserve the texts, but no one was reading them or utilizing them or practicing them. So the group at the Asian Classics Input Project, they uncovered the oldest woodblock printings of an asana sequence, which was Lady Naguma's asana series, and Master Taranatha's commentary, which is the machine of the body. So it's a super esoteric text that you read it and you go, how do you make sense of this? And that's where our scholars are really handy because they're trained not only in Sanskrit, but also in Tibetan. And so they're able to read multiple different texts to really take this apart and break it down into something that we can practice today. So there's many different levels of it. So we offered just now the Lady Naguma level 1 foundation training and master training. So we do trainings in China, in Russia, Europe, Mexico, and the United States. Of course, right now it's all virtual, but that's due to change shortly.
Yes, and you have a very exciting training coming up that I cannot wait to be a part of and to learn from. And I'd love for you to share a little more information about that.
Well, thank you, Heather. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm like beside myself. This is so cool. If you read Geshe Michael's um, translation and commentary of the Yoga Sutra, it's unlike any of the other commentaries or translations that I've read because of all these things that we've been talking about. So the last time he taught this translation was just about 20 years ago, a little shy of 20 years ago. And he's teaching it again now. So it's a very unique opportunity. He's going to be teaching chapter 2, which has the Ashtanga method in it. That's the quintessential presentation of the 8 limbs is in this book. And so we dig into the depths of what each of those limbs really mean and how to utilize them. And a couple of the really interesting concepts that Master Patanjali puts out there as a result of following these 8 limbs. Because you say, well, why do we do the 8 limbs? And it's an interesting interpretation of that. So I encourage everybody to if you get the chance, definitely come out. It's on May 21st. So for those in podcast land who hear this after May 21st of 2021, then we do have it recorded. So you can just drop us a line at info@yogastuddiesinstitute.org. And then Geshe will be teaching the chapter 3 and 4 in subsequent years, hopefully. So very excited for that. Can't wait. Chapter 1 was a hit. And so this one should be pretty great too. So it'll be 10 days. We'll have an asana practice, meditation, just to prepare our minds and our bodies to receive the teaching. And then we'll do a teaching and a Q&A. And then we'll have a Sanskrit 30-minute course right afterward. We will dig into the specific Sanskrit words because Sanskrit is just such a beautiful language. One word can just have so much depth. And so to really understand it in the mother tongue, we definitely wanted to take that opportunity. So we have Dr. John Campbell, who's a PhD Sanskritologist from Columbia University, who has studied with some of the greats. He lived in India for 5 years studying at the feet of Sanskrit and yogic scholars. So we're very lucky to have him join us too.
Yeah, it's going to be really incredible. Thank you for sharing all of that info. And what is a 10-minute tip that you can give anyone listening to try to get a little more mind, body, and spirit balance today?
Well, if we think about our body, this is something that I really, really enjoy about connecting the mind, the body, and the spirit all together. Is the Upanishads have a really beautiful presentation of this, and we have a slight riff on that. But if we look at our body from the outermost gross obvious level of our skin and our flesh and our bones and our blood, and then we go a level deeper, then we get to our breath. And so we can find that when we focus on our body, we come into a presence, right? You say, I'm going to feel, maybe it's the moisture on my skin, or I'm going to feel the wind in my nose as I'm breathing. And then if we really focus on our breath itself, we find that not only do we go into a more subtle place in our body, but we go into a more subtle place of our mind. And then if we go even further deeper, then the next level down is your prana, which is the vital energy that flows through us. And so if we put our mind now even deeper on the prana that's running through us, all of a sudden we become a little more quiet and calm and centered. And then if we go even further, then below our prana is our mind. And if we are now, we've gone through our body, we've gone through our breath, we've gone through our prana, now we've arrived into our mind. There's still some busyness there, still some, especially my mind. So then if we go even deeper, then what we find is we find what we call seeds, which are these implants that we put upon the world. So when we do something for somebody, then we're planting a seed deep inside of our mind that then will come back to show us what it is that we've done to others, will reflect itself back at us. And then if we go even deeper, we can think of this kind of like an onion where we're peeling the layers back further and further and further. And what's happening is our body's becoming more still, our mind's becoming more still, our spirit's becoming very calm. And at the center of the onion, after we've peeled all the layers off, there's no pit like a mango. There's no pit like an avocado. There's emptiness that's at the center of the onion. And because of that emptiness, that vast emptiness is what creates the possibility for every other layer to grow out of that. And so when we are able to consider how yoga transverses all the way from our gross reality of our physical body and the world around us, all the way to our most subtle reality, that's one of the ways that I like to think of it kind of like you can imagine like a puzzle where it's like a circular puzzle and you're just trying to line it all up. I don't know if you've ever it's like one of those things with the ball at the dentist office and you're like trying to get it from the inside to the outside or the outside to the inside, and you're just trying to get it all lined up perfectly. And sometimes when I'm in a very beautiful deep practice, then I'm able to feel as though I'm lining up all the way from that infinite potential, that emptiness, that infinite potential at the center, all the way through to my outer body. And in that moment, it feels very balanced. And then once I find that place, especially in my practice, because I do my asana and I do my meditation and then I go deeper as I've just opened up all my inner winds, my channels, my prana is flowing nicely. And then throughout my day, then I can do what Master Patanjali calls smrti, which is one of the 5 powers that he names. And smrti is remembering. It's like to bring our mind back. This is in the first chapter. And I bring my mind back to that place throughout the day. And so what happens is what our goal is to have our circle from that place of very beautiful connectedness, that balance. And then we get further and further away from it and we're like, oh, let's come back. And so even if I just do the smallest twist or even the smallest pranayama or even the smallest just little moment, but if I catch myself getting further and further away, what happens is that route, that circle of going from where I want to be to where I've gone now back, it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until the goal that I have not accomplished is that we never leave that place anymore. So the smrti becomes irrelevant because we don't have to remember because we've never left. And I think that you can do that as simple. One of the things I love to teach, Heather, is I love to teach smiling. I know that sounds really silly, but it's a very powerful thing where, especially if we think about our channels, when we smile, it connects to our central channel. And our central channel is where our bliss, our peace, our thoughts of compassion and love, that's where, when the prana runs in the central channel, that's what our experience of reality is. And when we smile, we're actually opening our central channel. And then if we just inhale And we imagine, just with our imagination, putting all of that wind, which is connected to the prana, which is connected to the mind, which is connected to the seeds, so you can see the entire gradient of our existence. Just through a smile, we can tap into that. And when I have a good, consistent practice, which isn't always, but when I do, that when I just do a smile and I remember the layers and I bring it all into alignment, just not even in 10 minutes, but just in a moment, I can find myself at least in a moment of balance.
That's beautiful. You got me smiling over here. Hopefully you listen at home or in your car smiling too. I always find when I'm smiling, it inspires someone else to smile, and then maybe without them even realizing it, you gave them a moment of balance too.
Oh, I love that. Heather, I did an experiment that I'd love to share with you. Is a smile experiment. When I was at university, I would take the same route to class every day, and I don't know, I just had this experiment that I wanted to try, which was smiling, because smiles are great. This is when I was really starting to, I don't know, consider these ideas for the first time, and it was really far out because the first trip to class of the semester, everyone's looking at me like I'm a wacko, which maybe they're right, maybe they're not, I don't know. But after about a month of consistently giving people my entire, like, I'd imagine giving them my whole being, just like unconditional love through my smile, just be like, man, I love you. I don't even need to know you and I already love you. And like having that be a true statement, within myself. By the end of the semester, my route was full of smiles because all of a sudden everyone was just like, it's time to smile, And so when we talk about shifting our reality, when we talk about changing our experience of reality, I find that I think about these big things like, oh, my house, my car, my blah, 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 like all these big things. But what I've really enjoyed in yoga is getting to more and more subtle levels of those things, where something just as sweet as a single smile, for me, indicates approaching a really beautiful world. And when I do my yoga practice and I give my smiles, just as an example, and then I say, is this working or not? Yeah, it's working. Do you see everyone smiling? I want to see a whole world that's smiling.
I love that. So beautiful. Okay, well, last thing, where can people find you? They want to find these trainings, tap into the beautiful work that you guys are doing over there at Yoga Studies Institute. How can they find you?
Would love to connect with each and every single one of you. Join our community. You'll find lots of people smiling. But it's not all smiles, right? But that's why a community is here. And that's one of the most special things about the community that we've been developing is we've created a safe place. So join us in that place at the yogastudiesinstitute.org. You can find our website. You can find us on Instagram at yoga.studies.institute. And we have a pretty fun Discord server for those of you who want to have the conversation continuing between posts or between trainings or anything like that. It's pretty lively. Right now, we're doing a 6-week giving challenge where every single day for 6 weeks, you have to intentionally give something, which could be time, it could be love. It doesn't have to be a material object. And the stories that are coming through on Discord are just really, really, really magical and inspiring when you're feeling stingy or unmotivated. So you can find us on Discord. You can just look up YSI.
Thank you so much, Bob. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast, and I appreciate all that you're doing in the world to help spread the original messages and philosophy of yoga. So thank you so much.
Thank you for holding this beautiful space, Heather. I appreciate you.
Namaste.
Namaste.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Bob Cirino of the Yoga Studies Institute. You can find notes based on our conversation at vintantra.com/podcast, and that's VINTANTRA. tantra.com/podcast. I'll include a link where you can sign up for their upcoming training, as well as check out the other amazing educational opportunities they have coming up over there. And as always, you can help spread our message by sharing this conversation in your communities by taking a screenshot or sharing it in your stories or on Facebook, or even in a message or email to someone who you think might benefit from this conversation. Thank you so much again, and we'll talk to you soon. Namaste.